Good morning, good evening, good night, wherever or whoever you may be. I'm Alan Orrante, and this is the first edition of The Social Hour. This series will be different in that it isn't so much an interview as it is a roundtable dialogue. The Social Hour will always have more than two people talking. In this case, it's Leo Moreno, Sean Bonilla, and myself. We discuss the elements of identity. We discuss what an ideal society might look like, and we get into a few peripheral topics along the way. This roundtable discussion was one that I pitched to Leo around my actually it was on my birthday in December. Sean's always posting these political memes that are really funny, and he seemed like somebody who'd be interested in talking about these subjects, and that was confirmed. Leo and I, on the other hand, get into these discussions often, especially when we're on a long drive somewhere, like to band practice. I could have sworn we tossed the ball around so long on my birthday that we got to the point where we were defining the word the and it. This first edition of the Social Hour was really an experiment. We had to navigate a 3-person phone call, which is difficult because you can't see the visual cues as to when somebody's going to talk or has something to say, but I think we got the flow of it. There were also a few times where we started to echo and we had to pause and resume. You'll hear a synth tone that tells you that that's pretty much a cut in the tape, but I don't think anything was really lost as a result of that. Of course, there will be kinks to be worked out when you try something new. I am optimistic about this effort and I hope we can do it again. So without further delay, this is the first edition of The Social Hour. Here's a loaded question, and I'll give it to Leo first. Leo, who are you?
That's always a difficult thing to answer. I think I guess I just kind of default to say I'm just a person, but that means so many other things, you know. But I'm always kind of going through all the different things that entails. Like it just means I tend to think of it very stripped down. It's like I'm just a life form, you know, a life form that exists in certain ways. And then part of that is, of course, identity, which is, I think, what we're going to try to aim at, right?
Yeah. What about you, Sean? Who are you?
I am a defrosted meat popsicle. I don't like. I'm always torn between the individual perception and hallucination of myself as, a singular being, or recognizing that as kind of a myth of our senses and wanting to see us as some sort of more complex collective organism that just doesn't realize it yet.
I feel like, or I'm sorry to cut you off. I feel like when people ask me that, or when I ask people that, actually, is really where I feel like strange about it. Like as soon as I start to, if somebody asks me that, who are you? I immediately think of my accomplishments, like what I do every day. Like, oh, I'm a teacher. Oh, I'm a husband. Oh, I've accomplished X, Y, and Z. And I wonder why that is. We tie our identity like so closely to what we do and what we've like earned, our status and shit. What do you guys think about that?
Well, that's like one of the things I've been studying in school. So I have a lot of different ways of addressing that, I think. But I think part of it is because we're embedded in like networks, right? We live our lives in groups. And so our position within certain groups, that's an identity. A lot of identities are based off they're paired, like you're a husband because you have a wife. There's like these reciprocal roles. So that's only one type of identity, though. I think there's like a lot of at least from the perspective that I've been learning about.
Well, that goes so deep because normally you hear identity and like I think of like appearance, job title. Like I was thinking about social media earlier today, and like I'll see people post a story where it's like literally 2 seconds long and they're sipping like a Slurpee or something, you know, and it makes me wonder, like, you know, why do they post that? And that's just me being like critical and stuff, like, you know, judging probably right away, like by default, just wondering why they're doing that. But I'm trying to learn, like, you know, there's somebody on the other end who's like, it makes them feel good, or, you know, and I just wonder like how that feeds their identity.
I mean, they want to be seen as someone. Like, I think of my short random stories when I post a stupid thing. It's like there's this is just a silly thing to connect over, or the subconscious, like, this will contribute to how I am seen, like my subconscious branding, you know?
Yeah, totally.
I think a really basic thing, and it maybe kind of answers your first question about like why do we identify with these kind of things. It's like we kind of like are what we do in a way. It's like you just want people to see like this is what I'm doing right now, like whatever it is. And I kind of like that about social media in a way. Like if you don't take it too seriously and kind of just think of it as like, you know, if you actually like are curious what these other people are doing, you know,
Yeah.
like what do they do with themselves throughout the day?
Yeah, I mean, is it pretty much like the same side of, it's like they're two sides of the same coin, like who we are and what we do. Like it's almost like, can you really think of one without the other? Like, is that like an essential like pairing, like what you do and who you are?
I think who we are is almost just like an accumulation of what we do in that way, you know? Because then there's like all of our theories about who we are and then who we really are, right? Because we can have all these thoughts about who we might be versus what we're actually doing, you know?
Yeah, I think that there's like a part of it that is like you're looking at yourself as like an object, all these different components, and then
Yeah, as an object, you said?
yeah. And like when you reflect on yourself in that way, then you kind of try to like, you know, combine a lot of different things, you know, memories and things. But
It's
I think
so
part of it, real quick, just part of it, I think, is that the things you do a lot throughout your life, that's what preoccupies, you know, what you think about. And
yeah.
like for if your job is really important, then that becomes a big part of who you are, you know.
Yeah, I don't know. The other weird thing too is like, you know, it's so subjective. Like, okay, like say I think, you know, X, Y, and Z about myself. There's no guarantee that others are going to think that about me, you know, like there's always a difference of like, I don't know. I would guess that our internal experience is a lot different than what people actually like perceive us as, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah, I always think trying to bridge that chasm between what we're seen as versus what is actually the case, and that attempt at self-awareness is like a perilous journey almost. Like you kind of have to be mindful of it, but even then in your mindfulness of it, you can only be mindful of what you're not, what you might miss in your self-perception, you know? And then society dictates all this other stuff, that how we measure what is our life, who are we, what are we worth, like, you know, society would dictate that we're just consumers and we're measured by what we can consume, and then we judge ourselves like that instead of like, what's the real content here, you know? What's the real stuff?
Yeah, like society definitely conditions a lot of that about how we think of ourselves in that way. But it is, I think, really crucial that we monitor how we think other people see us.
Yeah.
There's like a interesting concept for that called the looking glass self.
Ooh.
And it's like, it's a really simple thing. It's exactly what we just said. It's like, there's like 3 stages. Like you imagine what another person imagines you to look like, basically. And then that creates you experience a reaction to that, that's the final stage. So you you imagine how you look to others, and then that's going to make you feel a certain way. Like shit, I came off really bad there. Like you feel embarrassed,
Social sonar.
Yeah.
I mean, it's sort of like essential though. You think of, we like to think of ourselves as so complex, and like maybe we are, we in some ways we are for sure very complex. But, I recently saw this video where this mother wolf was like kicking its ass pretty much, like forcing it to submit, because if the cub doesn't learn how to submit, it's going to be a terrible pack member. It's going to get chewed up. Who knows what? So like as a pack, like a pack system or like a society, maybe however, or a family unit, whatever you want to call it, a group, maybe it's important that like you said, Leo, we are trying to monitor how we come off so that we can, I don't know, I guess just so there's harmony among a group.
Yeah.
We came into awareness of that stuff. Yeah, I was just going to say, we came into awareness of that stuff in groups. We evolved it in groups. So it's like we need that element to bounce back and catch ourselves. But on the same level, though, then as an individual, you might feel like, hey, don't tell me what to do, right? But then society's like, okay, but you don't even notice this thing you just have to submit to in order to even survive. So just, the tug of war between those points, right?
Yeah, that's like definitely a key thing too, is that to put it fancy way, it's a dialectic, right? Between the individual and the group.
Well, what is that? Like, I hear the word dialogue in there almost, but it's like, what does dialectic mean?
It is basically like a dialogue in a way. It's like 2 opposing forces. So like there's thesis and antithesis. And supposedly that will lead to a synthesis, which is like some kind of in-between point. And then that becomes the what's it called, the thesis, and then a new antithesis comes about. That's what like Marx saw as like driving history.
And what's that? Can you put it in the context of Marx? Like, what do you mean?
Of what he was talking about? Well, he saw class struggle as that, the opposing forces.
Oh, okay, yeah. Yeah, Marx, just to cut in real quick, I remember, like, Sean, you've been posting a lot of, like, I guess for lack of better term, political memes. They always fucking crack me up.
Yeah.
But like, Leo, do you remember on my birthday, we were talking on my birthday, and I was like, dude, we got one of these days, like you, me, and Sean have to just like talk about this shit. Do you remember that, Leo?
Yeah.
And all these months later, like here we are.
Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah, for some reason, I know it's awesome. We all for some reason are interested in like Marxism and socialism and shit like that. It's cool.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm glad a lot of people seem into it.
Mm-hmm. It's crazy because it's like its appeal as a fringe ideology in our system now, but then if you get as far as considering it, you see what an important building blocks Marx is to all these other ways of looking at the world that only here do we have such a negative stigma. Like, you can talk to someone who's like from Ukraine, saw the worst of it, and they would still be like, read Marx. It's a worthy thing to do, like.
Yeah. It was just this discussion about I think it was about gun rights and things, and then someone was like, a really funny thing to do is like show these two quotes to a conservative and see which one they agree with. And one of them's like by Marx, it's like under no conditions should you surrender arms and ammunition. And then this other one's like Reagan, and he's like, people shouldn't be able to carry these weapons. It was like after the Black Panthers were carrying like weapons openly.
Dude, what the hell?
Ronald Reagan passed some law like immediately after.
Dude, what the hell? That's so fucked up.
I know, it's funny though.
Like, what does that even mean? Like, well, were the Black Panthers, were they like a militant group, you know? Like, were they threatening? I honestly don't know.
Well, I'm pretty sure they formed to protect their own communities, like police their own neighborhoods and shit. But
they're confronting
they
the same problems. Like the same shit that we see now, where it's like the only difference is back in the 60s, it was like, well, instead of getting shot by police, we're just going to show up where they are and make sure that they don't get more aggressive than they should be, you know?
Wow.
Yeah.
But simultaneously, they're doing stuff like food outreach and making school lunches for kids and free healthcare programs, like a full community outreach. And they get noticed for the leather jackets and the guns and the anti-cop sentiment,
right.
You know, like.
Yeah, like that shit just made people nervous, like the like mainstream people. But there's like a lot of like really interesting shit that happened in like the 60s, and that kind of I think had a big role in what happened after. Like I think there was like race riots in the 60s as well.
Yeah.
And that was also I think around the time when like like ghettos were forming and things like that. And, then because, there's like closing of factories, that's when like a lot of jobs start moving overseas.
Damn.
And then just, wages stagnate. So people can't really like make a living as easily anymore. So a whole bunch of stuff just goes to shit. And then they start rolling back like fucking social programs. And it seems like
it's almost
they
like
just go ahead.
I was going to say, it's almost like once the civil rights movement had achieved some of its goals and the system of social safety that was built in the 50s was then going to have to be shared amongst different groups of people, the system, instead of facing that, just self-sabotaged and privatized and rebranded its Jim Crow like policies into something that still exists today in the form of like just how our prison population is mostly black people, brown folks, you know. We see it. It's like it never went away, you know.
Yeah, it was like a reaction to that, the gains of the civil rights.
What?
Part of it's that, and then part of it is like, just the world is changing, with like
we can make more money,
Yeah, the restructuring of capital and all that shit.
So
but then they offset those costs though against fucking poor and minority groups mostly.
And just by accident of history, the people who are poor and minorities are people who aren't white. It's just by accident. I mean, it's really a class struggle rather than like a race struggle?
It's both. I would say it's very much both, because the racial, like why black and brown people are under the boot and why are white people on average wearing it is the situation where it's like, who was here first? Who was here first and who was brought here when and why?
Right.
And it was like, what was the justification for seizing the land in the first place was this racial entitlement, this idea that Europeans are somehow better, and we live with the echo of that today.
Yeah, is that manifest destiny bullshit?
Yeah,
yep. That's the shit that.
Have you guys heard of settler colonialism? That framework?
Oh, yep.
Sounds familiar. Haven't heard too much about it though.
Basically, it's like viewing this country as like it's like a racial project of settlers that they're settling. They came to settle on this land, and that involved like displacing people and then creating this whole system of like hierarchy for races.
And it's called settlers colonialism.
Settler colonialism.
It's pretty much like what I was just going to say. It's pretty much like kind of what Rome did to Europe. Like Rome marched north, made all Europe speak Latin, and then even after they left, there's still the cultural influence lingering way after. And any group that reaped the benefit of, you know, the Roman culture depositing its wealth in their area was uniquely positioned to become an empire in the centuries that followed.
So settler colonialism it means what it sounds like, right? Basically, settlers go somewhere and they colonize. They form a city and just earn or take more and more privilege, pretty much.
Yeah, and it's like they institute a whole like their own values, and they create a whole like new system too, in a way, of hierarchy.
Man. Dude, and we in our school systems, we glorify this settlement, this settler colonialism in this country. We glorify it.
100, totally. Like there's no shame. Like we ultimately what this amounts to is like a full blown genocide of the original inhabitants, right? That played out. It played out well into like I say 100 years ago, but you know that's like less than 2 grandmas' lifetimes ago, right? It's not that long ago that we were filling mass graves, and we have no shame. Whereas like in Germany, for example, it's literally against the law to get too stoked about your own fucking genocidal history. Here we have no shame whatsoever. So that explains a lot about where we're at, I would say.
Yeah.
I mean, it makes me... Or go ahead, Leo.
I was just going to say that like nationalism and like the nation state as a concept too is so important. Like in, I think just global politics too, that it becomes an important part of like giving people like an identity and
yeah, like the whole what do you call it, the Pledge of Allegiance, that fucking kooky ass shit that I don't think kids have to, but like, you know, schools and school districts institute it. You know, they tell you to do that, and it's so scary. It's like these. I just remember not wanting to do it as a kid. I saw lots of kids over the last few years don't want to do it. Like they're just, you see it in their face. They're like, what the fuck am I saying? Like, what is this? Like, why should I be a proud American? Like, I don't know. It's fucking weird.
I remember like in high school. I think in like high school we were. I was just gonna say that in high school I felt like that's where we were allowed not to do it, and we wouldn't be given too much shit. But I remember other people would like one of my friends in class was like, you know, like people died for that flag or something. I'm like, yeah, but weren't they supposedly doing it for my right not to have to do that shit?
100%.
Like people always say like, oh, they protect our freedom. It's like, is that freedom come with conditions? Like,
apparently
exercise freedom how they want it.
How'd my freedom get all the way to the Middle East? That's my real concern. Like, what's it doing all the way over there? Like,
dude, I feel like stuff.
Origin. Sorry, I was just gonna say you just have to
look
at
the
origin of when the origin of that pledge was literally instated when the United States was terrified of the spread of communism. Like our cross-holding, flag-waving, particular brand of Americana became a weapon against the spread of workers' rights movements and class awareness and anti-imperialist thought. Like and here we are, you know, now we kind of feel chafing under it, being like, this is ridiculous. Why would anyone do this? but that's its origin, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's fucked. I feel awkward. Like I subbed for a few years, and so many times, like in the mornings when there's like Pledge of Allegiance, particularly in the middle schools, a lot of kids would just not do it. They would like not, look at the flag. They wouldn't put their hand across their heart. They maybe would stand. They'd sit down. And like teachers, like, I've been in the position where you feel like you should tell them to stand up and stuff, like, oh, you're just, acting out or something. But it's like, they're kind of like Leo, we've talked about this before, but how like, the Joker in the Batman universe is like a necessary evil in a way. And I know that's a terrible parallel to draw, but I'm just saying these kids are treated like a Joker or something. It's like, hey, quit fucking with the status quo, just stand up and do it. Like that's the feeling sometimes.
Yeah, like that theme like gets made fun of, but I mean, there is a lot of truth to it, and I think just for many people, it's kind of passe at this point. But it's like, yeah, obviously there's a status quo, and people don't want it to be disturbed.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's the thing that, like we were talking about earlier, how identity plays into all this stuff is that in the same way small groups needed to normalize behaviors to survive, right? And prevent from a certain type of variation from those behaviors in order to survive. That same fear is being exploited now to like, no, we can't have any variation from this perceived traditional norm or we won't survive. Like it's the same evolutionary mechanism being triggered to maintain this type of thinking now,
Yeah, I agree 100%. I think that's a lot of the things I've been like studying recently. I've been like social psychology, and that's like all about like group processes and things. And that's like the downside of it is because if you think back to like when humans lived in small tribes, and like that was obviously really like great and necessary. It's like you would hope that like you could, if you raised a human being, it would be loyal to your tribe and like not to some strangers. Like obviously there needed to be cohesion and things like that. It just gets out of hand.
Yeah, it's just like it doesn't work for like, there's so many of us now, it's like we're struggling to keep the status quo because it's safe. It's like harmonious to some degree. When workers just go to work and do what they're told, there's like an equilibrium or not an equilibrium, but a sense of like calm. But it's like, it like the social psychology you're talking about, like it has its faults. Like, you see, for example, again, like another animal kingdom parallel where like a herd of wildebeests are running over a cliff and the stream of them just goes and keeps going. They don't, it's like a herd mentality that it literally kills them. And maybe there's a parallel with like, human social psychology where, we can adopt or maintain these faulty beliefs or way of living. And it's like, the herd's just going over the cliff.
I think that's the point of us that's the point of us as like humans and all the sort of evolutionary skills is like we have the momentum of why herd is worth doing, and we have the skill set as individuals, but where we have this unique ability to say this is wrong, this is fucked up. Like as little kids, when in our ignorance, when our parents do something dumb, it's like it occurs to us then that it is dumb. Like this person has more experience than me, but this is not the best way, right? And now how many people are like, clearly there must be a better way to do what we're doing. There has to be a better way, another way, We have all the resources.
Yeah, it's so funny you mentioned that about like the kids and parents. I was recently like watching a bunch of videos about like like all those incidents of like people calling the cops on black people when they're just doing normal shit, like out in public. And there's like a there's a few where like they're with their kids and the kids are crying like, no, daddy,
This
don't.
is so stupid.
They're
Yeah.
like, don't call the cops, daddy, and they're like crying, and then they're just fucking doing it anyway. And it's like, wow.
Dude, the
It's
kids
like
are all
they're
right, honestly. Like,
yeah.
the kids are all right. Like, the future is going to be lit. Kids already have a vague idea of like, for all their experience, they clearly don't know what should be going on.
I mean, like, are we just waiting for the boomers to die? Like, what are we waiting for? Like, is this society just going to flip at some point where all of a sudden every politician had, a fucking TikTok when they were a kid? It's like, what, when?
Dude, TikTok, first of all, that shit, I've heard it's like loaded with like spyware for like Chinese spyware.
Oh, man.
It like collects more data than like any other app or some shit from your phone.
I mean, dude,
On the
that stuff's
boomers-
scary.
On the boomers
Go
dying
ahead.
or not, I always just think like, should we wait for them to die or can we get started? I'm like, is there something we could be doing to facilitate this? Like, I don't know. I'm ready for a world where like every politician running like might have nudes out, so it just doesn't matter. Like, you put up on the internet, and like those fake social barrier to entries are just eroded, and people can just like use the technology to facilitate a more effective system. Like, shit, come on.
So
I just don't. Like, or go ahead, Leo.
Like I want to be hopeful that things are going to change, and like it does seem like new generations are really on it. But another thing that I feel like it's kind of like the same issue we were just talking about, just about all these these group think type of things. There's a lot of like, I like to say, inertia to established ways of doing things.
Yeah.
Well, one thing, like, I was just reading a lot about like the concept of legitimacy and like how that works from the social psychology like perspective on it.
That's like kings and queens and shit, right? Where we see them as like a legitimate power.
That's one form of it, but the way they see it, it's like basically it's the belief that something is right, proper, natural, and the way things should be. It's viewed as legitimate.
What? So like language, like how we speak. If I talk with like a New York accent, it may not be seen as like proper or legitimate.
That's what, like, yeah, anything could be legitimate. Like, but what I was reading about was in regards mostly to power. And then there's like two sides of it that they talk about. There's like the individual side, whether an individual sees something as like legitimate, and then they called this other concept validity, and that's like if you think that everyone else thinks that it's legitimate. So it's like, even if you don't think something's right, if you think everyone else does, then
that's Emperor's New Clothes, or
yeah, that's a similar thing. So it's like you're much less likely to do something about it, or to even like to even express your emotions of like that was unfair. Like, they do it with these experiments about they have people in like these networks of like communication, and one person is like in the center and has all the power, and then they're told like that they can change the structure of the network by vote. But to vote on it, they'd each have to first send the message to the central guy.
Oh my god.
And so in the experiments, they rarely ever vote to change the system, even though they all know it's unfair.
Right.
And they like, basically that legitimacy gives things like this kind of like resistance to change, basically.
Is each individual afraid to confront the legitimate or the power, or are they afraid to be the only one to challenge the, for lack of a better word, status quo of that situation?
Well, they're all kept separate too. Like they can't communicate directly with each other. They have to communicate to the center person.
Damn, that's scary.
That's like what's that maximum prison setup where they have the tower in the
Panopticon.
Dude, hell yeah.
Also a great band, but on that though, it's like how does one interrupt that? Like, how does one interrupt that sort of procession of normalization of like our situation right now? And I think it all really does start as like every individual has like a unique ability now that we never had before. Like this, for example, like every individual has a full media studio in the palm of their hand, in the pocket of their hand. So now, even though we're all caught in this like web of propaganda and, you know, cultural norms and everything else, if each person arrives at their own position where they are aware of the problems and start drawing attention to it, and they coagulate into other groups that start spreading it. I just think of like how we all get into music, right? Like someone was doing it and looked cool doing it when we were young enough, and then we're like, that sounds legit. I want to fucking do that.
Yeah.
So really, it just comes down to like, just start giving a shit and look cool doing it.
Yeah.
I mean, it's
that's
tough.
The tiniest baby step.
That's the puzzling thing, though, too, is like, because in the past there have been successful like social movements,
and
then like, but nowadays things like that don't get the same traction. It seems.
I mean, is that why these artists? I was just gonna say, is that why these artists, like, you know, like Bob Dylan and shit, these guys who go out there on stage and like presumably put their safety on the line, you know, they'll talk against the war or whatever it is, whatever cause they're, you know, rooting for. I think there's a vulnerability. There's like it's a sacrifice, really. You know, you're sacrificing your image, your life, maybe.
Security.
Like the Dixie Chicks back in the day. Remember that?
God. Saints. Protect them at all costs.
I think I think they really did get kind of screwed for that back then.
What was that about? Do you remember, though? What were they saying?
The Iraq War, they were against it.
Yeah, they talk shit about George Bush, and then the entire country community just turned on them.
See,
and here's
that's
the deep
like
irony. Everybody who got offended at the Dixie Chicks is complaining about free speech right now. What the fuck? What the fuck?
Yeah, there's always a lot of like hypocrisy about that.
But I think that's it though. Like literally, like whatever platform you can get, whether it's like a tiny digital one or a giant stage, and just give a shit and look cool doing it, and it will be worth doing. Because there's no expectation that you'll like single-handedly succeed. It's more just getting other people excited, especially at this stage.
Yeah,
it's just
you just have to make communities.
Yeah,
but I mean, what even works? What even works now, though? I mean, dude, there's protesters out there like all the time, and you know, because I'm in my fucking room not doing shit, I don't see the difference that makes. You know, if it does or doesn't. It's like I feel like movements nowadays have to be like millions and millions of us. Like nothing seems like it changes.
It all starts somewhere. It does. You're right. It doesn't change like that overnight, but it all has to start somewhere. And I think where that plays out, like just look at the feminist movement in the 70s and the sort of cultural shift between the 50s and now. And that's literally stems from just a bunch of angry women who were just tired of it. And they put themselves in the line, and now the world's a little different. And in the same way, I mean, there's a further line to push. Like we can go from being like vehemently anti-progress to, okay, maybe a little progress, you know, and just make the idea seem more palatable to more people. Of course, if they won't let us do that, then that pushes for what must a harder type of struggle. But you know,
yeah, that's the thing. Like, I think for things like that to really work on a smaller level, I think it's got to be organized right. And because I think like people are doing like rent strikes and shit like that right now.
Yeah, yeah.
150. There's been 150 different labor strikes since the quarantine started. Yeah.
And those like can really work if you're organized and like you like do it targeted and like, you know, get enough people that are just not going to do, you know, go to work or not going to pay rent. And they just support each other like as a community, and that shit works.
It's fucking, it's really scary. Oh my God.
It's back.
I don't know why the hell.
I was going to say, once you start to like look at the daunting task that is ahead, it's really easy to feel like, fuck any part of this shit. I am just going to bury myself in a hole and hope for the best, right? But I think it's not, it feels good to kind of throw yourself out there being like, whatever happens, happens. You'll know you like, even just sharing a meme for me as a hairdresser who like my social media presence is like literally my business. I'm like, I kind of put myself out there in a potentially damning way just to say what I'm saying, but I keep getting positive feedback and I'm not losing clients because I must resonate with some people.
How about why don't we talk about just some ideas and elements and maybe critiques of our world now? So as a society, what would an ideal society look like to you guys?
I was thinking about it a little bit when you like showed me that the questions, and like the details I think are really hard to get down. That's the issue. But I think like the basic things that need to be there is it ties into identity for sure. There needs to be like, I think a society has to provide a path for you to have like a meaningful life somehow. Like you need to have like, you need to be able to forge an identity that's like valued and validated. And then like a lot of people just don't, they don't have the same chances for that. And that's what's really like unfair. And I think a lot of like the school shooters and mass shooters and things like that, I think a big part of that is that they're not like integrated, like they don't have like a valued identity that like makes them feel good about themselves, you know?
Well said. Well said.
But then it's like the details, it's like I don't know how the fuck you ensure that. That's the problem.
Yeah. I mean, dude, I would totally go exactly what you're saying. Like, how do we even ensure that? But to note that that's what our human needs are and not just like bare minimum stuff. I like the ideal situation almost has to come from a place where we don't like punish individuals for collective malfunction, you know?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So even if like a dude is a piece of shit, which like rightfully if a dude's being a piece of shit, exclude them from society, whatever. But we don't have the emotional resources to confront that. But in an ideal situation, we would have to all surround that person and be like, okay, we don't want you to turn into a supervillain in the shadows and come burn down our village. So we have to do right by even you, you know, even the worst of us.
Right.
Which is that's a tall order. That's a tall ass order, you know?
Yeah, and I think sometimes there's gonna be situations where like through no fault of their own, but you know, just a person maybe can't be that way, you know, like sociopath, like complete sociopath maybe. That
like
for
if they're
whatever
legitimately
reason.
sick in some way, just their wires are
Yeah,
not
like
crossed that way.
yeah, they're just not wired to work well with others like that. It's like, what do, you know? If they like
With
can't
folks
stop, like if they can't
with folks
stop
like
from
that,
hurting people.
yeah. I mean, I know someone who's diagnosed like literal sociopath, and even they have boundaries. Even they have like
Yeah,
they can be held to some expectations, which gives me hope. But it's like when you have the perfect storm of you're a sociopath, born with power, born with influence, and then the perfect storm creates a situation where it's like, oh, who's better equipped to turn our whole village against themselves and to their own benefit in some way, you know?
Yeah, there's just some that are too tough to like deal with, I think.
Yeah, you know, this is slightly off. This is on topic, but it's slightly off topic to exactly what you just said. But you know what I was thinking about recently? Like I was thinking also like what an ideal society would look like. And I think of the word homeless. So like, you know, like we're talking about school shooters, that's like one category of people in the society that the system doesn't it doesn't function for those people for some reason. But like the homeless also are like this category of people where the system just fails for one reason or another. Maybe maybe there is something wrong with them. You know, a lot of them are nutty out there. But you know what I thought? This is something that could happen now. This isn't even like a flowery, you know, like future. You know how many hotel rooms are vacant every fucking night?
The houses that are vacant. Sorry,
even the houses.
Too, yeah.
It's like, dude, we could provide
got the resources, you know.
That's what's annoying, dude.
Yep, it's just a choice. It's just a choice.
Like the infrastructure is there, the materials are there, the buildings are there, and they're vacant. It's like I know it doesn't make sense in our system, but it's how it is now. But like the physical stuff is there, ready to go. There are houses, hotel rooms that are just empty every day, and there's like all these homeless people. It's like can't we think of something?
Yeah.
I think that's like the first something. Sorry, I was just gonna say the first something is just convincing people with like the culture, like addressing the tendency to want to stamp out that idea as too progressive. Meet that, and then people will arrive at it naturally. Enough people already feel this way. They just think it's unpopular, or they shoot themselves in the foot with the whole, well, in our society that would be kind of hard. But it's like, but why though? Just fucking do it.
Yeah, like I think. Oh, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, there's already a precedent being set where homeless people have seized some property in the Bay Area and in Los Angeles, and lawyers have come to defend them, and they're setting up a legal precedent where if you're really struggling and you just take it and no one is really put out for you just having taken it, maybe you should just take it, is the sort of thing that should be put forward here, you know?
Yeah, like this is where it kind of runs back to this idea of like, how do you provide everyone also like a meaningful life? Like, I don't know, like
shelter,
like
literally,
like
step
people.
one.
Yeah, that's the thing too, is you need those first. You gotta have the important needs.
Yeah.
I also like you know, with like veterans and things, a lot of them are homeless.
Yeah.
Like I feel like a lot of them just like they can't address the problems that they have, like from having been in a fucking war. Which, you know, that's another source of the problem too, is like putting people in those situations. And then like they don't have the means to like address those issues. And in some cases, like to bring it back to identity, it might not even be like, you know, think of like the masculine identity, the typical masculine identity, to be independent and like asking for help isn't even like in line with that identity. So it's like
it's so fucked, dude.
To addressing that.
The traditional man is just like a doomed tragic hero by default.
Yeah.
Like you'll either die for the glory or suffer in the misery of not being able to ask for help for having survived this attempt at dying for the glory, which is like a real fucking tragedy. Like,
yeah, like
that's
I'm
the point.
not one.
It doesn't have to be this way, you know. It just doesn't have to be this way. There's other ways to do this, you know.
Like I'm not one to be all like fucking men's rights shit like that. It usually is typically like has some hidden misogyny in it.
Yeah, exactly.
But there's nothing wrong with pointing out, you know, the problems in the way that both gender identities are like shaped, you know.
Yeah. I mean,
if
these issues could be addressed, then I think on both ends, the way you're saying, like both sides of this coin could so easily be addressed, and the way they contribute to perpetuating the problems that they were so obvious.
It's so fucking complex. I mean, it's like all these people go to war and they come back a certain way, and decades later they're still crying when they think about these things. It's so complex. It's really hard to wrap my mind around, like, all this stuff. Basically, like, I can only think, I can only really know my own affairs and like my own emotions and powers. It's like it's hard to wrap my mind around what a civilization is going through, what a whole category of the species is going through, namely, males who come home from war. It's like hard to wrap your mind around these things.
Yeah, and that's part of the problem too, is like we want simplicity, and I think to an extent it's almost like we're built to approach life that way, but it's like not simple. It's like so complex because we can only like think of a few things in our mind at once,
I think on the simplicity versus the complexity of it, it's rough because it's like you have to take in the vast complexity of it in order to like get a scope of where the hell are we? How do we get here, right? But then you almost have to reboil it back down to some simple, not solutions, but what then must one do in the face of that, And I think like where I look at like some Marxist thought, and even like how, like specifically that is just like, how do you take our ideas about these things and materialize them? Whether it's on a really minuscule small scale or facilitating a space where people can have these big reflections and maybe arrive at a simple thing to do. There's big complexity, but every little small thing does affect it. So it's, I think it's easy to look at the complexity and imagine, oh, it's just not even worth bothering. It's just too much. But we forget the little stuff. We forget the little things that we can do to just shift it,
I mean, it's tough. It's like, even if, okay, give me the perfect society, put me in there right now. Like, with not a perfect society, but let's say an ideal society, it still assumes, I figure, because at this level, there's billions of us. It's not like, a town hall where you just take a vote, we're talking billions of people having to talk about a million different topics and different problems and different things. So an ideal society probably still has like some kind of governing body. So like, I don't know if that's like anti-anarchism or something, but it's like, we need some governing body. And, we really, I think as individuals, most of us have to sort of like give up some of that say, because there's just so many of us. We have to trust representatives to make the best choices.
We definitely need a government, and we definitely need representatives, and I think it's possible to have some form of democracy. I imagine like if we could develop a thorough enough secure technology to kind of consolidate digital impressions into a democratic data set that can be used to interpret people's needs, that would be an ideal situation. But in order to really manage that, it would kind of have to be like a centrally planned system that is facilitated by technology, but is still very much in the control of the users completely. Like, I think we're in a unique place where all of this stuff is very much within the realm of possibility. We just have to think of it as such. We really do just have to think of it as possible to get to the point where we could even have the brainstorm session to see what that would look like,
Yeah, that's a problem too, and we just don't even consider possibilities too.
Yeah, that's my case for idealism in the face of all this madness, is because you almost have to have the willingness to consider it as possible to even have the dialogue to find out what's not possible and worth excluding,
Yeah.
But I mean, the whole immortal science of Marxist Leninism kind of itself it kind of hands itself down with the expectation that the next generation is going to adapt and apply it for their material conditions, and not just hand down instead the traditional mindset that we're all raised to think, that dooms us into the cynicism that's like, well, fuck it, I guess I'll just find a sex doll about it. Like, there's no hope for anything. I have a drug addiction about it. It's totally chill. And in that level, I'm like, I don't blame anybody who is on that level, because it is heavy. This is hard. Life's hard. This sucks,
Yeah.
It's a tall order, the opposite of that,